I knew something had snapped in my family the morning I found my spare house key on the doormat, wiped clean as a bone, as if the metal had decided I no longer deserved to open my own door. I am Margaret, Maggie to the few who remember, and at 74, I live in the small brick house my late husband built one summer, whistling through cracked lips and telling me that peace would be the last gift he could leave me. After he died, peace became the sound of the kettle in the afternoon and the rustle of my geranium leaves when I opened the kitchen window. It was quiet, a little lonely, but it was mine. I believed my children would orbit close enough to keep that quiet soft, not sharp. I raised two of them, Daniel, who was born serious and who used to line up his toy cars by color, and Lucy, whose laugh was so round and bright that the neighbors once clapped when she giggled in the courtyard. I gave them the sleeves of my sweaters when they were cold and the softest side of my toast when butter was scarce. I taught them politeness, like prayer. I thought that would be enough to keep us knit together, even when time stretched the fabric. Oh, what an old fool I can be. The key on the mat came after a week of little humiliations I tried to ignore. Lucy rescheduling our Sunday tea twice, and then sending a 10-second voice note that ended with a sigh I didn't recognize. Daniel replying to my messages with a single thumbs up instead of words. The way their spouses, Emma with her clipped, efficient sentences, and Alex with his never-ending advice, had begun to speak about me in that way people talk about an appliance that is both necessary and inconvenient. Mum's bills are too high. She keeps the heating on. She gets dizzy on the bus. Maybe she shouldn't be alone with the garden shears. I started to feel like a problem wrapped in a cardigan. Still, I told myself families have seasons. I made shortbread and waited for spring. When Daniel arrived last Wednesday to discuss a few things, he didn't remove his shoes like he always had as a boy. He stood in the doorway like a landlord, tapping something on his phone. "Mom, can we sit?" he said, even though he was already sitting at my table, already opening the notebook Emma had given him with a label on the front, Family Plan. The boldness of it made my chest prickle. He cleared his throat. "We've been thinking. The house is too much for you. Yards, stairs, repairs. You fell last year. We need a plan." He smiled in a way that was meant to soothe. "It's for your own good." I made 2 cups of tea and set mine down very carefully because suddenly everything felt like ice. "By we, you mean you and Emma," I said. He didn't correct me. He had a list. Sell the house now while the market is good. Move me into a smaller flat managed with services. Consolidate assets so they could unlock value for future care. Cancel my magazine subscriptions because who reads those now, Mom? He used words like a surgeon uses thread, as if he were stitching my life into a shape that would fit a chart. "Your father," I said, "wrote in his will that the house should remain in the family until I'm gone. It says I can live here as long as I wish." Daniel looked sorry for me in the way people look sorry for a dog during fireworks. "Things change," he said. "We can't be sentimental about bricks." He had not known those bricks warm under my palms at dawn, the mortar catching the first light like sugar. He had never cared for them the way I had. Scrubbing each sill after your father's cough turned into a silence that ate the whole hallway. I didn't say any of this. I said, "No." It felt very small in my mouth. He closed the notebook. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." On Friday, Lucy came by with Alex, who smells of cologne and certainty. She carried a box of pears, as if fruit could sweeten what they were about to do. "Mom," she began, and her voice tilted toward me like an apology. "We found a wonderful place near us. They have a piano in the lounge and volunteers who come to read poetry. Alex slid a brochure across the table, a smiling woman with hair the color of a magazine cover, pouring coffee in a cup that would never chip. "You'll make friends," he said. "You'll be safer. Also, full transparency, it helps us manage childcare if you're closer." He spoke like every sentence deserved a trophy. I asked, "Closer to help you with the school runs?" He said, "We're all family, aren't we?" It was a question that felt like a door closing. I turned the brochure face down. "I have friends here," I said. "The birds nest under my gutter. Children chalk flowers on my pavement. Mrs. Keene from number 6 brings me leeks. The postman knows to knock twice." "That's quaint," Alex said, and I don't think he meant to be cruel, but the word stuck like a thorn. Lucy's eyes watered. "Mom, we're worried." I wanted to say I'm worried too, but about a different storm entirely, the one I saw gathering in their faces, the one that would wash away the strange little island where my memories sit drying on a line. Instead, I cut pears into exact slices and placed them on a plate shaped like a leaf, because hospitality is the last language I speak fluently. After they left, the house sighed around me. I stood in the hallway and touched the paint where my children's heights were marked in pencil. I traced the year Lucy shot up by 5 centimeters, and Daniel had cried, furious at his bones for not joining the race. When I went to bed, I dreamed of keys. In the morning, I found mine on the mat, gleaming. I knew I hadn't put it there. Perhaps someone had used it and returned it, clean as if shame had scrubbed it. I called Daniel, no answer. I called Lucy. She picked up, whispered, "I'm in a meeting," then, "I'll call you later," then didn't. A hush gathered in the corners like cobweb. I knitted half a sleeve and unpicked it. I waited. At noon, Emma messaged, "We signed the papers to list the house. Don't worry, we'll handle everything. It'll be a relief for you." I read the words 3 times. I had not given them permission. Perhaps they thought I wouldn't understand the steps, how everything important now happens in portals and emails, passwords and checkboxes. But I have kept ledgers of gas bills since 1981. I can follow a line of numbers like a breadcrumb trail through a dark wood. I put on my coat. I took the bus to the estate agent whose windows I have walked past for 30 years. There, on the second row, beside a farmhouse with beams and a flat with a balcony too small for a chair, was my house. My house, printed in cheerful font, photographed at an angle that made the front door look flirtatious. "Viewings start Monday," the card said. The world went far away and tinny, like a radio in another room. I pressed my palm to the glass. I saw, reflected above my stooped shoulders, a young pregnant woman in a summer dress with yellow lemons printed on it. Me once, standing with my husband as he said, "This is where we'll grow old, you and me." The memory broke like a raindrop. Inside, a young man in a tie asked if I needed help. I opened my mouth, and the wrong sound came out. I sat on a plastic chair. He brought me water. I said finally, "That house is mine." He glanced at his screen, professional and kind. "It's listed by power of attorney on behalf of..." He read the names of my children. Something old and stubborn uncurled in me. "They do not have that power," I said. "My husband's will." He held up a hand gently. "If there's a dispute, you should speak to a solicitor. Until then, the listing stands." I walked home as if every step were a question. The key on the mat waited like a silent witness. I put it on my palm and felt how cold it was. Then I did something I haven't done since my children were small and had nightmares. I locked the door, slid the chain, and sat with my back against the wood until my heartbeat slowed. On the table, the brochure for the wonderful place lay under the estate agent leaflet like a terrible sandwich. I chose an old weapon, pen and paper, and wrote to my children. I did not beg. I wrote the facts, the clause in the will, the refusal of consent, the history in these walls that belongs to me, not to a market. I ended with a sentence that surprised me because it was so calm. If you come on Monday with strangers to walk through my rooms, you will find me here. I signed it Mum because despite everything, that word is both a wound and a crown. I had just sealed the envelopes when I heard a car door close outside. Then voices. Then my letterbox flap lifting. A leaflet slid through. Viewings confirmed. Monday, 10 o'clock a.m. Beneath it, in a hand I knew as well as my own, 2 words had been scribbled. Don't resist. The pen had pressed so hard, the paper tore. I stood so quickly my chair scraped. The kettle clicked on by itself. No, I realized, my hand had done it out of habit. Steam fogged the window. Through it, I could just make out the shape of someone standing by my gate, looking up at my bedroom window, their phone raised like a small, bright weapon. I put my fingers on the chain. I did not move. And in that lace of steam and fear, something fierce started to burn inside me, like a coal that had been sleeping for years. The second night after I saw my house in the estate agent's window, I barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like an intruder. I lay there staring at the dark ceiling, thinking of all the times I had whispered lullabies in this very room, patting Daniel's back when he had fevers, or holding Lucy's hand when thunder made her sob. I thought of how safe they had felt here, wrapped in their mother's care, and now those same children plotted to move me out as if I were a misplaced chair. The next morning I went about my routines as if nothing had changed. I boiled water for tea, sliced bread, even watered the geraniums in their cracked clay pots. But underneath, a storm brewed. My hands trembled when I held the teapot, not from age this time, but from a kind of anger I hadn't felt in years. I told myself I needed clarity. Perhaps this was all a misunderstanding. Perhaps Emma had signed something she wasn't allowed to sign. Perhaps Lucy didn't know how far things had gone. Mothers always try to soften the edges of betrayal, don't they? So I called Lucy again. She answered after the second ring, her voice carefully light, too careful. "Mom, I'm busy. Can we talk later?" "No, Lucy," I said, my tone sharper than I'd meant. "Did you know my house is being shown to strangers on Monday?" Silence, then a small intake of breath. "Mom, please don't make this harder. We're trying to help you." "Help me?" I could hear my own voice rising, cracking. "By stealing the walls your father built? By throwing me into a place that smells of disinfectant and lost dignity?" "Mom," she whispered, "you don't understand. You'll be safe there." And yes, I knew. We all agreed. It's the best thing for everyone. "Everyone except me," I said, and before she could reply, I ended the call. My heart pounded so loud, I thought the neighbors might hear it. For the rest of that day, I wandered from room to room, touching objects like relics, the worn armrest of the sofa, the dent in the kitchen table where Daniel once slammed his toy truck too hard, the faded wallpaper my husband and I had glued up together with laughter and flour paste. Every surface whispered, "You belong here." That evening, as the street lights flickered on, I heard a knock at the door, not the quick double tap of the postman, not the neighbor's polite rap. This was slow, deliberate. I stood frozen, my hand hovering over the chain. Then came Emma's voice, sharp but sweetened for effect. "Margaret, open the door. We just want to talk." I did not move. "Mom," Daniel's voice followed, lower, coaxing. "Please, we know you're inside." I pressed my back against the door, my breath shallow. For a moment I considered opening it, letting them in, pleading one last time. But then I remembered the words scribbled on the estate agent's leaflet. "Don't resist." That was not a child's request. That was a command, a warning. They knocked again, then silence. After a while, I heard footsteps retreating, a car engine starting. I slumped to the floor, every bone in my body heavy. That night, I wrote in my journal, something I hadn't done since my husband's funeral. "If my children are my enemies, who will stand beside me?" But the next day brought an answer I hadn't expected. Around noon, Mrs. Keene from number 6 appeared at my back gate with a basket of leeks and potatoes. She saw my face, pale and drawn, and said, "You look like you've been crying, Maggie. What's happened?" Something inside me broke. I told her everything, the key on the mat, the papers, the viewing. She listened, her weathered hands gripping the basket tight, her eyes flashing. "They can't do that without your consent," she said firmly. "Don't you let them bully you. You're not alone. We've lived here for decades, haven't we? This street is yours as much as it's theirs." Her words lit a small candle inside me. I wasn't invisible, not yet. Someone saw me. That night, I took out my husband's old tin box where we had kept important papers. The will was still there, his handwriting shaky but clear. "The house shall remain the residence of my wife Margaret, for as long as she shall live." I placed the paper on the table, smoothed it flat, and stared at it until the words etched themselves into my bones. If they came on Monday, I would not hide. I would not beg. I would show them this will, show them that love written in ink could outlast greed written in contracts. But even as I told myself this, fear crawled up my spine. Because in the shadows of my mind, I could still see that figure outside my gate, phone raised like an accusation. Someone was watching me, and it wasn't just my children. And for the first time in years, I locked not only my door, but every window, every latch, as if bracing for a storm that was about to break right over my roof. On Sunday morning, the day before the viewing, the air felt heavy in a way that had nothing to do with weather. Clouds hung low, yes, but the weight I carried was not in the sky. It was in my chest. I woke early, long before the church bells, and sat at the kitchen table with my husband's will laid out before me like a shield. The house was still, the clock ticking louder than it ever had. I brewed tea but forgot to drink it. The steam rose and then faded, just like the years that had slipped through my fingers. I thought of Monday. Strangers would cross my threshold, their shoes trampling over memories. They'd nod at the fireplace and comment on character or potential, and all the while I would stand there like a ghost, unseen in the very place I had poured my life into. My stomach twisted at the thought. I had two choices, let them or resist. I decided to resist. After breakfast, or what I pretended was breakfast, just toast left untouched, I picked up the phone. I called the solicitor my husband, and I had used years ago when we drew up our wills. To my surprise, the number still worked. A secretary answered, and after some explaining, she put me through to a young man named James. His voice was brisk, professional, but not unkind. "Mrs. Harper, If your husband's will states clearly that you have the right to remain in the property, then your children cannot sell it without your explicit consent, he said. A power of attorney can only be used if you've granted it, and even then, it must be registered. Did you ever sign such a document? No, I said quickly, heart pounding. Never. Then they are acting illegally, James confirmed. If they've begun proceedings, we can challenge this immediately. May I schedule a meeting with you tomorrow morning? We'll prepare an injunction if necessary. Relief rushed through me like cool water, but with it came dread. Tomorrow was the viewing. Would I have time? Yes, I said firmly. I'll come. After the call, I felt a surge of courage, but courage is fragile. By the afternoon, when the light slanted across the floorboards and the shadows looked too long, doubt crept back in. My children had always been clever, always 2 steps ahead. What if they had already found a way around the will? What if the law bent as easily as my daughter's excuses? A knock startled me, 3 sharp raps. My hand shook as I opened the curtain just a crack. It was Lucy. She stood at the gate, arms folded, her face pale. "Mom?" she called softly. "Please, can we talk?" Against my better judgment, I opened the door, but left the chain on. Her eyes darted past me, scanning the hallway. "Mom, you're making this harder for everyone. You don't understand. Daniel and I were drowning. The bills, the pressure. Selling the house helps all of us. You'll be safe, and we won't have to." "Won't have to what?" I snapped. "Won't have to worry about your mother. Won't have to think about the woman who carried you, fed you, sat up through nights when you burned with fever." Her lips trembled. For a moment, I thought I saw the little girl in her, the one who used to press daisies into my hands and say, "For you, Mom, because you're the best in the world." But then her eyes hardened. "You're being selfish," she said quietly. "Don't you see? It's not just about you anymore." I closed the door in her face. The sound echoed through the hall like a final word. I slid down to the floor, tears stinging, but my resolve only grew stronger. Selfish? After a lifetime of sacrifice? If clinging to the only home I had left was selfish, then so be it. That night, I couldn't eat. I sat by the window watching the street. Around 9, a car pulled up. Daniel stepped out, his phone glowing in his hand. He didn't come to the door. He just stood by the lamppost talking, gesturing. At one point, he raised his phone and seemed to take a picture of the house. My house. Then he drove off. Sleep didn't come easy. When I did drift off, I dreamed of footsteps echoing through my rooms, doors opening and closing, voices laughing in rooms that were no longer mine. I woke with a start, the sheets damp with sweat. On Monday morning, the day of the viewing, I dressed with care, not in my old cardigan, but in my husband's favorite dress, the blue one with tiny white flowers. I pinned my hair back, put on lipstick for the first time in years. If they wanted to see an old woman beaten down, they wouldn't. They would see someone ready to fight. At 9:30, I gathered the papers into a neat folder and placed them on the table. My heart beat like a drum. Outside, cars slowed, then passed, as if the whole street was holding its breath. At 10 o'clock sharp, I heard voices at the gate. A cheerful estate agent, strangers murmuring, and yes, my children. They were coming. I placed my hand on the will, straightened my back, and whispered to myself, "This is my house, and today they will hear me." But just as I rose to open the door, something slipped through the letterbox with a soft flutter. I bent down, another leaflet from the estate agent, but this one was different. On the back, scrawled in thick black pen, were 3 chilling words, "Get out now." And as I stood there, clutching the paper, I realized the true storm was only just beginning. I froze when I read those words. Get out now. The letters were so dark and heavy, they bled through the paper, as if whoever wrote them wanted the ink to stab me. For a long moment, I just stood there in the hallway, the leaflet crumpling in my trembling hand, listening to the muffled voices outside. My children's tones, polite but tense, the estate agent's forced cheer, the stranger's curious chatter. The world was still going on at my gate while I stood with a message that felt like a dagger pushed under my door. A part of me wanted to tear it up, tell myself it was nothing. But another part whispered, they want to scare you. They want to make you leave willingly so they don't have to fight you. That thought sent a slow fire down my spine. If they thought an old woman could be frightened out of her home with ink on paper, then they had forgotten who raised them. I straightened my back, smoothed my dress, and placed the note flat on the table beside the will. Then I opened the door. The estate agent, a tall young woman with too much perfume, was mid-sentence, telling the viewers how quaint and full of character the house was. My Daniel and Lucy stood slightly apart, their faces tight, as if they'd been caught in a lie. The two strangers, a couple with calculating eyes, turned to me with polite surprise. Good morning, I said, my voice clear, stronger than I felt. I'm the owner of this house. There will be no viewing today. The agent blinked, her smile faltering. Oh, Mrs. Harper, is it? I was told the property is under power of attorney. It isn't, I cut in. I lifted the folder and opened it, showing the will like a priest shows scripture. This states that I have the legal right to live here until my last breath. No one has the authority to sell without my consent. A hush fell. Even the couple seemed uneasy, glancing at each other. The estate agent looked toward Daniel, waiting for him to correct me. Mom, Daniel said, stepping forward, his voice smooth. Don't make a scene. This isn't the time. This is exactly the time, I said, louder now, my throat tight with heat. You signed papers behind my back. You tried to list my home like it was a suitcase you could pack up. And now someone has sent me a threat. I held up the leaflet with the black scrawl. Was it you, Daniel, or you, Lucy, or one of your clever spouses who thinks I'm just a burden? Lucy flinched, her eyes glistening. Mom, no, we'd never. Then who? I demanded. Because it came through my letterbox this morning right before you arrived with your strangers. The couple mumbled an excuse and left quickly, the man tugging his wife's elbow. The estate agent, embarrassed and flustered, said she would have to confirm the legal standing and scurried off after them. That left only the three of us on the path, me on the doorstep, my children on the gravel. Daniel's mask slipped, his jaw tightened, his eyes cold. You're being ridiculous. You're sabotaging everything. Everything? I asked. You mean your plans for my house, my savings, my life? You think because I'm old I don't understand. But I do, Daniel. I see exactly what you're doing. He stepped closer, lowering his voice, but I heard the hiss in it. You can't keep this up. You're frail, forgetful. People will believe you're not capable anymore. Do you want us to take you to court and prove it? The words cut deep, not because they were true, they weren't, but because they were spoken by my son, the boy I once carried on my hip while cooking dinner, the boy who used to cry if I left the room. I stared at him, my heart thudding, and then I whispered, try. Lucy began to cry then, tears streaking down her face. Mom, please stop. You don't understand how hard it's been for us. Alex lost work. Emma's stressed all the time. We thought, if we managed things better, if we... You thought you could steal from your own mother. I said, my voice breaking now. Dress it up as help. Call it safety, but it's theft and betrayal, and I will not forgive it. Daniel grabbed Lucy's arm and pulled her away. Enough, he muttered. We'll deal with this differently. They left without another word, their car speeding off down the road. The silence they left behind rang in my ears. I closed the door, bolted it, and sank into the chair by the table. My whole body shook. I should have felt triumphant. I had stopped the viewing, made my stand, but instead dread settled heavy in my stomach. Daniel's threat lingered. People will believe you're not capable. What if that was their plan all along? To paint me as confused, unstable, unfit to live alone. One accusation, one staged incident, and suddenly my rights could vanish. I looked at the will again, my husband's handwriting firm and steady. As long as she shall live. But how long could I hold out against my own children if they decided to fight dirty? The house creaked, the clock ticked. Outside, a bird landed on the gate, its wings fluttering. For a moment, I wished desperately that my husband were still here, his steady hand on mine, his voice telling me we would be all right. Instead, I was alone, but not broken. I folded the will carefully, tucked it into my handbag, and whispered into the quiet, if they want a war, then a war they shall have. Yet even as I said it, the note on the table seemed to whisper back, those 3 words in thick black ink, get out now. And deep down, I feared it was not just my children I was up against. It was something darker, someone else waiting in the shadows, eager for me to stumble. The night after I stopped the viewing, sleep would not come. I sat in the living room with the lights low, the will clutched in my lap like a lifeline. Every sound in the house seemed louder, the tick of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the groan of the old pipes. I felt like a soldier on watch, waiting for an attack that might come from anywhere. My children had retreated, but Daniel's words replayed in my mind. People will believe you're not capable. That was the weapon they would use next. They wouldn't come with hammers or police. They would come with whispers, papers, and signatures. They would come to strip me of my right to decide for myself. I thought of the note again. Get out now. It lay on the table beside me, its ink still sharp. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had stood in the dark outside my door that morning, waiting for the perfect moment to slide it through. My children had denied it, but who else would want me gone? The idea that there was another hand in all this made my skin crawl. At dawn, I made up my mind. I wasn't going to wait helplessly for the next move. I dressed, put the will in my handbag, and took the early bus into town. The streets were still quiet, shop shutters just rattling open. The solicitor's office was in an old sandstone building, tall windows gleaming in the pale light. Inside, the young solicitor, James, greeted me with professional politeness, though his eyes softened when he saw my shaking hands. I explained everything: the attempted sale, the forged authority, the threats. He listened carefully, taking notes. Mrs. Harper, he said finally, you're right to come. If no power of attorney exists, your children had no legal right to act. We'll file immediately to halt any sale proceedings. As for the threats, he hesitated. You may want to involve the police. The word chilled me. Police. I had never been the sort of woman who called them. In my mind, police were for burglars, accidents, loud parties, not for family matters. But this was no longer just family, was it? I'll think about it, I said. He nodded, then handed me copies of the paperwork he would submit. Keep these with you at all times, he said firmly. If anyone questions your right, show them. When I stepped back into the street, a strange mixture of relief and dread washed over me. I had protection now, at least on paper. But I also knew my children wouldn't give up so easily. As I walked toward the bus stop, I saw a figure across the road, a man in a dark coat standing very still. He wasn't looking at the shop windows or his phone. He was looking at me. When our eyes met, he turned and walked away quickly, disappearing into an alley. My heart lurched. Was he just a passerby, or the one who had pushed the note through my door? Back home, I found Mrs. Keene waiting by my gate with another basket of vegetables. I heard raised voices yesterday, she said, her eyes sharp. Your Lucy was crying. She was trying to take my home from me, I said bitterly. Mrs. Keene pursed her lips. Children can be cruel when money's involved. Don't you let them bully you, Maggie. If you need a witness, I'll stand by you. Her words warmed me. For the first time, I felt I wasn't entirely alone. That afternoon, Lucy called. Her voice was shaky, almost childlike. Mom, I didn't mean for it to go this far. Daniel, he pushes and I follow. I didn't know about the threats. Please believe me. Part of me wanted to believe her. She was my daughter, my little girl with daisies in her hair. But another part remembered her standing with Alex, brochure in hand, telling me it was for my own good. Then prove it, I said coldly. Stand with me. Tell the truth. She hesitated. I can't. Not yet. Daniel will never forgive me if I do. Then you've chosen your side, I replied and hung up. My chest ached, but my anger was steadier than my sorrow. That evening, I made soup and ate it slowly, each spoonful like fuel for a battle I knew was coming. The street outside was quiet, but I kept the curtains drawn, the chain on the door. Every time headlights swept across the window, I held my breath. At midnight, I finally dozed off in my chair. A noise woke me, soft, deliberate, from the back of the house. I held still, ears straining. There it was again, the faint squeak of the garden gate, then the crunch of footsteps on gravel. I rose silently, my old knees protesting, and crept to the back window. In the moonlight, I saw a shadow moving near the shed, a tall figure hunched slightly, fumbling with something. I wanted to scream, but the sound lodged in my throat. Instead, I gripped the edge of the counter, whispering to myself, "Not my house, not tonight." The figure straightened suddenly, as if sensing my gaze, then slipped back through the gate and vanished into the darkness. I stood there shaking, every nerve alive. When I finally returned to the living room, I saw the note again, black letters glaring at me. Get out now. But I knew then, as fear and fury mingled inside me, that I would not. Whoever was in the shadows, whether it was my children's doing or someone else entirely, they would have to drag me out of this house because I was not leaving, not while I still had breath. The next morning, the house felt different, like it was holding its breath with me. Sunlight crept across the floorboards, but instead of comfort, it felt like exposure, like the walls were no longer protection, but paper screens anyone could tear down. I barely slept after seeing that shadow by the shed. My bones ached with exhaustion, but my mind was sharp, sharper than it had been in years. Fear has a way of sharpening the senses. I brewed tea, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the two papers lying there, my husband's will and the note, life and death on the same wood. One was a promise that I would be safe here until the end of my days. The other was a threat that those days might come sooner than I wished. I thought about calling the police, like James suggested. I even picked up the phone twice. But what would I say? An old woman saw a shadow in her garden. Someone pushed a note under her door. They'd nod, write it down, maybe file it, and then nothing. Worse, they might call my children, and Daniel would use it as proof that I was paranoid, confused, unable to live alone. That was the trap. Every cry for help could be twisted into evidence against me. So instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I armed myself, not with anything grand, just with my late husband's heavy torchlight, the one we used to keep in the shed for power cuts. It was thick metal, weighty in my hand. I polished it, checked the batteries, and placed it beside my chair. A ridiculous weapon, maybe, but it made me feel less naked. Around mid-morning, the phone rang. It was Daniel. His voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm he used as a boy when he had done something wrong and wanted to convince me otherwise. "Mom," he said, "listen to me carefully. We can sort this without lawyers, but you need to stop making things difficult. People are talking. The neighbors heard shouting. It's not a good look." I gripped the receiver so tightly my knuckles whitened. "You threatened me. You forged papers. You brought strangers into my home, and now you want me to be quiet for the sake of appearances?" "Mom," he said again, softer this time, "we're only trying to protect you. Don't you see? You're not thinking straight. Last night you called Lucy at midnight, saying someone was in the garden." "I didn't call Lucy," I interrupted. My blood ran cold. There was a pause on the line, just long enough for me to hear the truth in the silence. He knew someone had been there. "I'll give you time," he said finally, his tone hardening. "But this won't end the way you think." When the line went dead, I sat very still, staring at the phone. A slow shiver ran through me. How had he known about the garden, unless it had been him or someone working with him? By midday, Mrs. Keene knocked at my door. "I saw a man by your shed last night," she whispered urgently. "Tall fellow, dark coat." I shouted, but he ran off. Relief and dread collided inside me. I wasn't imagining things, but it also meant I was truly being watched, stalked like prey. Mrs. Keene touched my arm. "You should come stay with me a few nights." I shook my head. "If I leave, they'll take the house. I have to stay." Her eyes softened with pity, but she didn't argue. Instead, she promised to keep watch from her window. "I won't let them scare you," she said. That night, I double-checked every lock, every latch. I sat in the living room with the torchlight on my lap, the will on the table, and the note pinned beside it like evidence in a case. My heart pounded at every creak, every gust of wind. Hours passed. Midnight came. Then footsteps, soft, deliberate, in the gravel outside. My breath caught. I killed the lamp and sat in the dark, my old eyes straining toward the window. A silhouette moved along the fence, pausing near the back door. My grip tightened on the torchlight. The handle rattled. I rose slowly, every muscle trembling, and crept toward the door. The chain was on, but the lock jiggled, metal against metal. Whoever it was had a key. I thought of the spare set I had once given Lucy, for emergencies. My stomach turned to ice. The door creaked open an inch, the chain pulling taut. A whisper came through, low and harsh. "Stop resisting, Mom, please." Daniel's voice. I nearly collapsed where I stood. My own son, trying to slip into my home like a thief. "Get out!" I shouted, louder than I thought my lungs could manage. "Get out before I call the police." The chain rattled, the lock scraped, then silence. Footsteps retreated, fast this time, crunching away into the night. I stood there shaking, the torchlight raised, until my arms ached. Tears spilled down my cheeks, hot and bitter. When I finally slumped into the chair, dawn was already creeping across the sky. My house was still mine for now, but I knew something had changed forever. My children weren't just trying to take my home. They were willing to break into it, to terrify me, to force me out. And as the first bird sang, a terrible realization settled in my bones. If my own children could do this, then what else might they be capable of? I whispered into the empty room, to the ghost of my husband, to anyone who might hear, I will not surrender, not to them, not to anyone. But even as I said it, I felt the house tremble with me, as if it too feared what was coming next. By Tuesday morning, my body felt like stone. The long night had left me hollow, yet my mind would not rest. Every corner of the house seemed changed now, like a stage where I no longer trusted the props, the teacups, the curtains, even the creak in the stairs. They all looked back at me as if asking how much longer I could hold out. I tried to keep my routines. I boiled water, toasted bread, spread jam, but each bite turned to dust in my mouth. I walked from room to room, pressing my hand to the walls as though I could absorb strength from the bricks my husband laid with his own hands. His memory was the only army I had left. At mid-morning, I heard the sound of a car pulling up outside. My chest tightened. Through the lace curtain, I saw Lucy's car. She sat in the driver's seat for a long time, gripping the wheel. At last, she stepped out, but she wasn't alone. Alex followed, tall and smug, holding a leather folder. I stayed behind the curtain, heart thudding, as they approached the gate. Lucy rang the bell. "Mom, please, open the door. We need to talk." I stayed silent. "Mom, we brought papers. If you just sign them, all this fighting will end. You'll be looked after properly. Daniel says—" Her voice cracked. She looked over at Alex, who frowned, tapping the folder. "I won't sign anything," I called through the door, my voice shaking but loud. "Not today, not ever. This is my home." Alex stepped forward, his tone sharper than hers. "Mrs. Harper, you're making this much harder than it needs to be. The house is already in process. If you refuse to cooperate, you risk losing everything, your finances, your dignity. You can't stop progress." "Progress?" I spat back. "Stealing from your own mother-in-law is progress?" Lucy flinched. Alex's jaw tightened. For a moment I thought he would snap, shout something ugly. Instead, he said coldly, "You can either leave with grace or be forced out by the courts. Choose wisely." I could hardly believe the arrogance in his voice. I pressed the will against the glass of the door so they could see it. "This says otherwise. As long as I live, this is mine. Do you understand? Mine." Silence fell. Alex muttered something to Lucy, then they walked away, the gravel crunching beneath their heels. But as he turned, Alex glanced back at the house with eyes that made my skin crawl, like a man studying a puzzle he was determined to solve, no matter what it took. I thought that was the end of it, but an hour later the phone rang. It was a voice I didn't know, smooth, professional. "Mrs. Harper, this is a social services officer. We've received a concern about your well-being. May we schedule a home visit?" My knees nearly gave out. Already they were moving against me. Whispers, accusations, painting me as frail, unfit, just as Daniel had warned. "I am perfectly fine," I snapped. "I do not need visits. My solicitor is handling everything." The caller paused, clearly surprised by my firmness. "We'll note your refusal, but please understand, Mrs. Harper, we may still be obliged to check in." When I put down the phone, my hands were ice cold. They were tightening the net around me. If they couldn't scare me out, they would brand me incapable, strip me of my say. I sat at the table with the torchlight in one hand, the will in the other, and felt my strength flicker. But then I remembered Mrs. Keene's promise, the way her eyes had blazed when she said she'd stand by me. Perhaps I wasn't quite alone, after all. That evening, as the sun set and the street lamps blinked on, Mrs. Keene knocked gently. She brought me soup, rich and warm, and sat across from me as I told her about the phone call. "They're trying to paint you weak," she said firmly. "Don't let them. If anyone from the council comes, I'll be here. They can't just walk in and take your life away." Her certainty lit something inside me. I clasped her hand across the table. "Thank you. You don't know what it means to me." When she left, the house didn't feel quite so silent. But silence returned later, deep into the night. I woke to a noise, a faint metallic scrape at the back of the house. My heart slammed against my ribs. Torchlight in hand, I crept toward the kitchen. Through the window, in the moonlit garden, I saw the shed door ajar again. A shadow moved just beyond it, bending low as if hiding. I tightened my grip on the torch, my throat dry. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice shaking the stillness. The figure froze, then bolted, vaulting over the back fence with a speed that shocked me. I rushed out onto the porch, my bare feet cold on the stone, but he was gone. When I returned inside, breathless, I found something waiting on the doorstep, a small envelope. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was a single photograph, grainy but clear enough. It showed me asleep in my chair, mouth slightly open, blanket pulled to my chin. The picture had been taken through my own window. My blood turned to ice. Someone had been inside my garden, watching me, close enough to capture me in my most vulnerable moment. I dropped the photo on the table, my whole body shaking. This was no longer just about money. This was a hunt, a warning, a promise of what could come next. And as I stared at the image of myself, helpless in slumber, one thought pounded louder than all others. If I didn't act soon, they would not just take my house, they would take me. I sat for a long time, staring at that photograph of myself asleep. It lay on the table like a mirror of my worst fear, proof that someone had been close enough to breathe on the glass, to raise a camera, to watch me while I dreamed. The photo trembled in my fingers as if alive. Every instinct in me screamed to run, to hide, to leave the house at once. But then the old, stubborn voice inside me, the one my husband used to call my lion, spoke up. "If you run now, you'll never stop running." I slid the picture into a plastic sleeve, tucked it next to the will, and locked both inside my husband's tin box. Then I poured myself tea, even though my hands were shaking so badly the cup rattled on the saucer. The smell of the brew grounded me. In this kitchen, I had brewed thousands of cups, for my children after school, for my husband after long shifts, for neighbors during storms. This was my ground. No one was going to uproot me. When morning light spilled across the table, I decided it was time to stop hiding and start documenting. I took my old flip phone, yes, still the same one, battered but faithful, and snapped pictures of the note, the photograph, the scratches on the back door. I even recorded a short voice memo describing the man I'd glimpsed in the garden. If they tried to paint me as confused, I would have evidence. At 10 o'clock, a knock came at the door. Not Lucy or Daniel this time. It was a woman in a gray coat holding a clipboard, a social worker. Her smile was polite but wary. "Mrs. Harper, we've had a report about your well-being. We just want to make sure you're safe." My pulse thudded. This was it, the first official step of their plan. But I didn't open the door wide. I kept the chain on and my voice steady. "I'm perfectly fine," I said. "I have legal counsel, and I'm recording this interaction." Her eyes flickered at that. "You're entitled to refuse a visit," she said carefully. "We just want to help." "Help," I repeated, the word bitter in my mouth. "By removing me from my home?" No one said. "Then good day," I said, and closed the door gently but firmly. Through the curtain, I watched her make a note on her clipboard, then leave. Minutes later, my phone rang. It was James, my solicitor. "Mrs. Harper, the injunction went through this morning. Any sale or transfer of your property is frozen until a hearing. You're protected for now." Relief flooded me so fast my knees nearly gave out. "Thank you," I whispered. "Also," he added, "if you feel threatened, you can request police protection. Don't hesitate." After we hung up, I allowed myself to cry, just a little, silent tears slipping down my cheeks. For the first time in weeks, a flicker of safety appeared on the horizon. But the flicker didn't last long. At dusk, as I was closing the curtains, I saw a car idling at the end of the street. Not Lucy's, not Daniel's. Dark windows, engine running. It stayed there for several minutes. Then another car pulled up behind it. 2 men got out, one smoking, one on his phone. They didn't look up at my house, but their bodies radiated the same kind of watchful waiting I had felt from the shadow in the garden. I stepped back from the window, heart hammering. Were they hired by Alex, by Emma, or someone else entirely? An investor eager for my property, a stranger who saw a vulnerable old woman alone. I called Mrs. Keene, my voice low. "There are men outside, 2 cars. She looked out at her own window. "I see them. Don't open the door. I'll ring my son. He's a constable. Just sit tight." I thanked her and hung up, then turned off all the lights in the front room so I couldn't be seen. In the dim glow of the kitchen, I sat with the torchlight across my lap, every muscle tight. The house felt like a fortress under siege. An hour passed. The cars finally drove away, engines growling. But they left behind a heavy silence, the kind that fills a room like smoke. That night I dreamed of my husband again. He was in the garden, laying bricks, his back bent, whistling. When I walked toward him, he looked up and said, "They can only take what you give them, Maggie." I woke with tears on my face. In the morning, Lucy called. Her voice was different, quieter, brittle. "Mom, things have gone too far. Daniel's furious about the injunction. Alex says you're making us all look bad. They're planning something." "What kind of something?" I demanded. "I don't know. I heard Daniel on the phone last night. He said, 'We'll force her hand.'" "Mom, you have to be careful." For a moment, my anger softened. "You could stand with me, Lucy. You could tell the truth." She sniffled. "I'm scared of him, Mom." "You're scared," I said gently. "But I'm the one sitting alone in this house with strangers outside." She didn't answer. Then the line went dead. I sat staring at the phone. The daughter I had once protected from monsters under the bed was now warning me of real monsters in my garden. And yet she still couldn't step between us. By afternoon, another envelope arrived through the letterbox. No handwriting this time, just a printed message in bold black letters. "This is your final warning." My hands went cold. Final. What did that mean? I taped the note to the wall above my table, right next to the first one and the photograph. My little evidence board, my war room. I was terrified, yes. But somewhere under the terror, a different feeling stirred. Defiance. They thought they were breaking me, but each threat only made me more certain of what I had to do. I whispered aloud to the empty kitchen, to the ghost of my husband, to the walls themselves. If they come for me, they'll find I'm not as weak as they think. And in that moment, as the late sun burned through the window and lit up the old wooden table like an altar, I began to form a plan, not just to survive, but to fight back. On Thursday, the air was heavy with a storm that hadn't yet broken. Clouds pressed low, and the house felt darker than usual, as if it knew what was coming. I sat at the kitchen table with my tin box in front of me, the will, the notes, the photograph, all tucked inside. My little chest of truth. Every time I looked at it, I felt both safer and more endangered. If anyone else got hold of it, my last defense would vanish. I decided then that hiding was no longer enough. I needed allies beyond Mrs. Keene, beyond Lucy's trembling whispers. I picked up the phone and called James, my solicitor. "Mrs. Harper," he said, "I was just about to call you. Your children are moving fast. They've filed a petition to assess your mental capacity. If they succeed, they could argue you're unfit to make decisions." The words fell like stones into my stomach. So this was their plan, to brand me senile, confused, incapable, to make the law itself their weapon. "What can I do?" I asked, gripping the phone so tightly it creaked. "You need evidence of your clarity," he said. "Written statements, witnesses who can testify that you're competent. The notes you've been keeping will help. And Mrs. Keene, if she's willing, her testimony could be crucial. I'll file a response, but you must prepare yourself. They won't stop." I hung up, my legs weak. They wanted to erase me while I was still alive, to make me vanish without having to lift a hand. That afternoon, Mrs. Keene came by with her son, the constable she had mentioned. He was tall, with kind but sharp eyes. He listened as I showed him the notes, the photograph, the threats. "This is serious," he said, "but without catching them in the act, it's hard to prove. Still, if anyone tries to force entry again, call me immediately. You're not alone." His words gave me a strange comfort, though I still felt the ground shaking beneath me. At dusk, I sat by the window watching the street. A car slowed, then parked halfway down, lights off. My chest tightened. I couldn't see who was inside. An hour later, another car joined it. My skin crawled. Were they watching, waiting for the right moment? I shut the curtains and turned on every light in the house. If they wanted me to cower in the dark, they'd be disappointed. Near midnight, I heard movement again, gravel crunching, soft but deliberate. I held the torchlight in one hand, phone in the other, ready to call. My breath came shallow. Then, a tap at the window. I nearly screamed. Slowly, I turned my head, and there, through the glass, was Lucy, her face pale, eyes wide with fear. I unlocked the door and pulled her inside. She was shaking, her coat damp from rain. "Why are you here?" I demanded. "They're planning something," she whispered. "Daniel and Alex tomorrow. They said if you won't leave willingly, they'll make you." My blood turned cold. "Make me? How?" She shook her head, tears spilling. "I don't know exactly, but I heard Alex say, 'One more push and she'll break.' Daniel didn't argue." I pulled her to the table, sat her down. "Then you'll stay here tonight. You'll testify tomorrow with me. Tell the truth about everything." But she recoiled, clutching her coat. "I can't. If Daniel finds out I warned you, he'll never forgive me. He'll cut me off." I stared at her, my daughter, the child I once rocked to sleep through nights of fever. "Lucy," I said, my voice breaking, "they are trying to destroy me, to steal not just my home, but my dignity, my life, and you're worried about your brother's forgiveness." She sobbed silently, then fled, leaving the door swinging in the storm wind. I closed it slowly, my hands numb. My daughter had chosen fear over me. My son had chosen greed, and I was left with only myself, an old woman with a torch and a tin box. I didn't sleep. I sat upright all night, eyes on the door, the storm rattling the windows. At dawn, a knock came, not soft, not hesitant, a hard, deliberate pounding that shook the frame. I froze. "Mom," Daniel's voice called, smooth and commanding. "Open the door. We need to talk." Behind him, I heard other voices, Alex's deeper tone, and another I didn't recognize, men's footsteps shifting on the gravel. I clutched the tin box to my chest, heart thundering. This was it, the push Lucy had warned me about. I whispered to myself, to my husband, to the house that still held his warmth. Not today, not ever. Then I shouted through the door, my voice stronger than I thought possible. "This is my home, and you will not take it from me." Silence followed. Heavy, dangerous silence. And then the chain rattled. Someone was trying the lock. My grip tightened on the torchlight. I stood, back straight, ready. Because if they crossed that threshold, they would discover that even the weakest-looking woman can still bare her teeth when cornered. And the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm rising inside me. The pounding on the door grew louder, each blow vibrating through the old wood like a heartbeat. I stood there with the torchlight in one hand, the tin box in the other, and for the first time in my life, I felt the weight of every year pressing down on me. But I also felt something else, a steel thread running through my spine. They thought I was weak. They thought I was finished. But they had forgotten that a mother who has fought her whole life doesn't surrender at the threshold of her own home. "Mom!" Daniel shouted. His voice was not the voice of my little boy, not the one who used to cry when I left the room. This was a man's voice, sharp and cold. "If you don't open this door, we'll call the police ourselves. We'll tell them you're confused, unsafe. Do you want to be dragged out like that?" The words hit me like stones. But instead of breaking, I burned. I set the tin box on the table and flung open the curtain. There they were, Daniel, Alex, and another man I didn't know, tall and broad, clearly hired for intimidation. Their faces were lit by the porch light, hard and expectant. I raised the will in my hand, pressing it flat against the glass. "This house is mine until I die. Your father wrote it. The law agrees. And if you try to cross this door again, you'll answer not just to me, but to the courts." For a moment they hesitated. Alex muttered something to Daniel, who scowled. The stranger folded his arms, impatient. And then, salvation came from the side gate. Mrs. Keene's son, the constable, strode up the path with 2 uniformed officers behind him. Blue lights flashed at the end of the street. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the storm. Daniel froze. Alex swore under his breath. The tall man stepped back into the shadows. "Mrs. Harper called us earlier this week," the constable continued. "We've been monitoring. We have the injunction paperwork right here. Unless you gentlemen want to be arrested for harassment, I suggest you leave. Now." I'd never seen my children look so small. Daniel's mouth opened, then shut again. Lucy was not there, but I thought of her tears, her whispered warnings. For a second I hoped she would step forward, admit the truth, but she didn't. Alex tugged at Daniel's arm. "Come on. Not here, not now." Daniel's eyes met mine through the window. They were cold, wounded, furious. Then he turned and walked away. The officers followed them down the path, ensuring they left. The street slowly emptied, silence settling again. Only the storm remained, the rain pattering against the glass like 1,000 tiny hands applauding. I sank into my chair, shaking. Mrs. Keene came in without knocking, wrapped her arms around my shoulders, and whispered, "It's over, Maggie. You stood your ground." But I knew it wasn't truly over. Families don't heal overnight, and betrayal leaves scars deeper than any wound. Still, for the first time in weeks, I felt safe. The house, my house, had stood with me. The walls had not betrayed me. In the days that followed, James reassured me that the courts were on my side. The injunction was solid. My children could try again, but each attempt would only weaken their case. I had witnesses now. I had evidence. And most importantly, I had found my voice again. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops and the garden glowed gold, I sat with Mrs. Keene on the porch. We sipped tea, listening to the birds. She asked quietly, "Do you think they'll ever come back, your children?" I looked at the geraniums by the step, their petals trembling in the breeze. "Maybe," I said, "but if they do, it will not be as thieves. It will be as children, if they remember how to be that again. Until then, I will live here as I always have, one day at a time." I leaned back, closed my eyes, and for the first time in a long while, I let the peace of my husband's promise wash over me, "As long as she shall live." And now, to you who have listened to my story, I ask, what would you have done in my place? Would you have forgiven, or would you have fought? Tell me, from which city are you watching? Did my story remind you of someone you know? If it touched you, subscribe to hear more stories like mine, because every voice matters, especially the voices of those the world tries to silence, and mine is not finished yet.